Hello and welcome to the Journal. I'm Steve Kendall. In the wake of incidents around the country involving social injustice and racial issues, and including one here in our area, Bowling Green State University recently held a day of dialogue on Friday, September 18th to illuminate and discuss those issues and to look at ways to move forward. We're joined by Jennifer McCary, Chief Diversity and Belonging Officer here at Bowling Green State University. Jennifer, thank you for joining us today, and welcome to the Journal.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Now let's talk a little bit about the Day of Dialogue before we delve into some other areas with regard to the Diversity and Belonging Division. Let's talk about the Day of Dialogue. What was the purpose and what were some of the things that went on with that?
Sure. So the Day of Dialogue, which just took place on Friday, was really a day for us to come together and make sure that we had a full day that was focusing on some of the current issues related to social justice, racial justice. We had a long summer programming series that started in June, and the Day of Dialogue was the end of that series, but also the start of the fall series. And so it was the midway point of our programming. And our goal was to make sure that people were thinking about some of the current day issues and our role at Bowling Green State University in trying to contribute to a more inclusive campus environment. So we really framed the day with guests that focused on, various topics, but from different areas of campus. So we had different administrators, we had different faculty, we had alum who were able to participate, senior administrators. And then we also had an invited keynote speaker, Dr. McKinley Melton, who's an associate professor of English at Gettysburg College. And everybody brought such a different topic and level of expertise and passion. We had some graduate students who were able to participate, and I think that it was just a really great day that we wish could have happened in person, of course.
Sure.
But I think that we utilize you to the best of our ability.
Yeah, and I guess that's true. Now, what were some of the topic areas? What were some of the presentations about specifically?
So the alumna, Natasha Shabazz, she did a session called Invisible Paint. And that session, for example, talked about some of the hardships that she faced at another institution based on race before deciding to transfer to Bowling Green. And then after graduating with her degree from Bowling Green, she remained in town and still local. And so she talked about her experience locally and really gave a powerful charge to some of the things that we need to be doing to improve the city, improve the campus, and make sure that everybody is thinking about their role and responsibility in getting people to stay right here in Bowling Green, Ohio. Her point was that when we have the opportunity to have people attend the university, we should also be aiming to get them to stay in the area and contribute back to the community. And so really powerful message there. Our Center for Public Impact did a great session on really our responsibility to being civically engaged and the importance of understanding the electoral process and getting out and voting, but also being involved in the community and not just waiting until it's election season to get involved, but having an understanding of different things that are happening. We had some faculty and staff, Katrina Hallmeyer, Jen Stucker, and Heidi Neese, who did a session on what it's like to identify as white women while trying to do the work to be anti-racist. And they really had a powerful conversation on some of the obstacles that they confront, but then also some of the things that they're able to do to make sure that they are standing up for justice. Really powerful conversation. President Rogers and Provost Whitehead had a discussion that was featured earlier in the summer, and we thought that it was important to bring it into the Day of Dialogue on race in the academy. And there you get to hear Provost Whitehead talk about kind of his journey and some of the stereotypes that people placed upon him and how he worked hard to overcome those stereotypes and go through the ranks of academia. So there were a number of sessions. Our keynote spoke on it's our business to be bothered and used literature to really walk us through the fact that we have an obligation to be concerned about what's happening in our nation, and that, it is something that every single person should be bothered by, and that there's a point where we have to unite and understand history, but also see a way forward and our role in that path forward. And it was just such an incredible keynote. I was getting messages. The chat was,
Mhm.
just saying, wow, this was so powerful. And the day continued with plenty of sessions, including from our multicultural affairs staff and some other areas, but too many to really even highlight. But
Sure.
all of the sessions were good.
And the good news there too is those are still all available for people to see, to go online and watch. So they are
Yes,
available. Right,
absolutely. They
right.
are available. And that was the one great thing I will say about doing this in a recorded version instead of live.
Hmm.
If it were live, we wouldn't have necessarily been able to hold on to this material, but now
Right.
people can go back and view it. And we were able to highlight our university libraries. And so now people are saying, I didn't realize that we had so much right here on campus because we had three folks from the library who did great sessions as well.
Yeah. Now, what were some of with the first speaker that you mentioned, the first presenter, what were some of the obstacles? What are some of the challenges that we face in the community at Bowling Green, the city of Bowling Green, and the university combined? What were some of the specific things that were addressed?
Right. She spoke a lot about just her experience as a woman of color
Hmm.
living in the community. And she talked about, some of the stereotypes and misconceptions. She spoke about really her experience with being pulled over and how that has kind of transformed over the years, her
Hmm.
experience with, not being accepted as a member of the community in a very open way initially. And in talking to her, she's really talked about the changes that she's seen in the community over the years for the better, and how we need to continue to improve in order to make sure that people can see themselves living in Bowling Green, Ohio.
Right.
So those are some of the specifics.
Mhm. Yeah, and I know, and you mentioned driving, and I know that, for years that has been an issue, the driving while black situation.
Yes. Yes.
And I know that when you listen to other people, and especially a month or two ago, several months ago, you had a lot of prominent people, athletes especially, saying that they had dealt with that, professional athletes, that they felt that they were, being focused on in a way that maybe another driver might not be. So that's still thing. But I guess the good news there is she said that she has seen a change in a number of those areas of a positive nature. So that's
Right.
good. Okay.
Right.
All right.
Yes.
Well, we'll be back in just a moment. We'll take a quick break, and we'll be back with Jennifer McCary, the Chief Diversity and Belonging Officer here at Bowling Green State University. Back with the Journal in a moment. Thank you for staying with us here on the Journal. Our guest is Jennifer McCary, the Chief Diversity and Belonging Officer here at Bowling Green State University. Jennifer, we touched on the Day of Dialogue and went through some of the specific events, but as you said, that was sort of the end of the summer list of events or fall list of events, but now we're moving into the beginning of another sequence. So talk a little about some of the other events and other initiatives that are going to play out over the next few months here at the university with regard to these issues.
Sure. So the next program that we actually have coming up is happening tomorrow. And so we are focusing on Will Rise Up, and it's various leaders from the Black Student Union as well as the Black Alumni Council of Bowling Green State University, really talking about Black people who are leaders, entrepreneurs, innovators, and how you can see people climb in community, and really ways that people can be supportive of their businesses and their endeavors. And so we're looking forward to having current students as well as alum get together as a panel to really talk about ways that people can learn more and be supportive of some of the business endeavors that folks have going on. Not in our town, which is very active in the Bowling Green community, is also having a free speech, hate speech panel coming up on September 28th at 6:30. And so we're looking forward to having a discussion, a lot of great panelists set up for that one as well, to make sure that we start to have a conversation as we move into this election season, especially about the issue of free speech versus hate speech. We want to make sure that people understand that there are respectful ways to have dialogue,
Mm-hmm. Right.
that there are rights that people have as well. And I think that sometimes we forget that there is the right to free speech. And so people will have the way to express themselves. But we want to make sure that we start to open up that dialogue and exchange so that people understand the difference when free speech crosses into hate speech and the impact that that can have on our community.
Yeah. Now, what would be, what would be that difference? If I know it's not a simple situation, but what would be some of those things where you do cross that line from my right to free speech, now suddenly the way I've said something or the words I've used now make it hate speech? What is the
right?
Where is the?
Words,
it's a gray area. I'm sure it's a tough line to define, but there is a line there.
It is. And tune in to that program just to make sure that you're hearing it from experts. But what I can tell you is that when our words start to really incite violence or, hate in a certain way, when it becomes threatening and discriminatory based on somebody's actual or perceived identity, and it is something that speech is now a threat to their safety, either because of something that you yourself are saying that you will do or that you're encouraging other people to do, you start to really cross over into a line of hate speech. And so we've seen examples of that where it can escalate fairly quickly, even if it wasn't the person's intent. And that's where we want to make sure that we're educating folks and making people aware of the fact that there is a very fine line, and you can quickly kind of tip over from just stating your opinions to saying something that is now threatening and problematic. And we also have to have a conversation about the fact that each person has a different level of safety, right? Safety means something different to everyone. And so what happens that may make me feel threatened may take, a different form or happen a different level than what it would take to make you feel threatened or unsafe. And that's something that we need to understand as well, is that it really is based on the target too, the person who's experiencing that. And so we can easily sometimes say, oh, that shouldn't have bothered them in that way. But for some people, your lived experience is going to make you understand something or experience something in a different way.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting too that you say that, because when someone does something that does offend people, a lot of times the apology includes the phrase, "If I offended you." Well, you obviously have, and that's almost a non-apology. If I did, I'm sorry. I didn't, it's an interesting way to deal with that. But you make a good point that a lot of times we only think of how we feel about it, not how it's going to impact somebody else.
Correct.
And we've gotten to a stage too where in some cases, we just don't think that words carry any weight sometimes. And the reality is they do. Words mean something. And,
they do.
And as you said, that you should be able to factor that in when you're entitled to an opinion, you're entitled to free speech, but you also should look at that and say, okay, but what is the impact of what I'm about to say?
Right.
And I think that you make some really good points there. So that should be an interesting thing, because it's an area where we all think we sort of know the difference between free speech and hate speech, and that free speech is open-ended, there are no consequences, whatever, but this is a good way to deal with that and kind of help illuminate that issue a little bit if you can.
Right. So I thank Not in Our Town for doing that, and just all of the programming that Not in Our Town has really engaged in and continues to engage in. And so hopefully people will be supportive and honestly even get involved and go to some of the monthly meetings as well. Right.
And I know that one of the local papers has decided to do a monthly column on this issue and allow that, which as you say, there's a lot there to talk about. What would be the next thing that you, in that sequence of events, that you would like to tell us about?
So right now, there's also a book club going on the book Hood Feminism, and it's not too late to join. If people are interested in joining the conversation, it continues, and it's really important for people to recognize that, understanding the literature and some of the things that are written about history is really important as well. And so we're having some of those discussions. In October, we're going to continue with some programming. We're looking at the 1619 podcast and making sure that we kind of talk about, some of the issues that come up within that podcast. One of the specific ones that I think will be of interest, given where we are in this community, is on agriculture and thinking about farmers and land and the evolution of that. And so looking forward to that discussion as well. And then our Center for Public Impact is just doing a lot of programming around voter registration and getting out to the polls. And so I encourage people to look for the Center for Public Impact's programming, and they will be out on campus and doing some things virtually just to make sure that people understand some of the various factors that are coming up this year. We're talking about mail-in ballots versus going early versus voting on election day and things of that nature. But the Center for Public Impact does a great job in a nonpartisan way of having these discussions and making sure that information is available. So those are some of the various things to look for. But I'm really grateful for the fact that so much of this programming is happening in the city and across campus, and in local areas as well. Perrysburg has a great coalition that's focusing on social justice issues as well. And so it's great to see organizations like Welcome BG and La Conexión and Not in Our Town and the Perrysburg Coalition for Social Justice and Inclusion in partnership with the university and the programming that we're doing as well. Because what you're starting to see is that we're really starting to focus on what it means to build an inclusive community. And it's extending beyond the campus of Bowling Green State University. And we're really looking at a community as a whole, as in, this portion of the region that we have some control over. And I think that that's what being a public university for the public good is all about. Right. When we talk about being for the public good, it means that we're doing things that won't just impact our campus and our pocket. But we're really working in concert with so many other people who have similar goals to make sure that, we're a welcoming and inclusive place for people to live. And Bowling Green is just, it's a very special community to so many people. And so we want to be sure that folks understand that there's a group of people who are really dedicated to making sure that everyone can live and learn in a great space.
Yeah, and it's a good point. The borders of the university don't stop at the streets that define the university in terms of its physical location. That right. Our students are out, our faculty are, the staff members, the community are part of the greater community, whether right. it's Perrysburg, Bowling Green, Toledo, wherever, right. Sandusky. Right. So the impacts and the issues don't just stop where those defined political borders are, jurisdictions right. are. So that's a good point. We'll be back in just a moment. We've got one more segment with Jennifer McCary, the Chief Diversity and Belonging Officer here at Bowling Green State University on The Journal. Thank you for being with us here on The Journal. Our guest is Jennifer McCary, the Chief Diversity and Belonging Officer at Bowling Green State University. And Jennifer, we've talked a lot about very specific programs and very specific issues, some of the things that are going to be happening and have happened over the last month or so and will continue to happen. But this is all part of these individual pieces are all part of a much larger plan. So talk a little bit about the strategic and comprehensive kind of overlay that covers all of these topics you've talked about.
Right, thank you. So in June, we released the Diversity and Belonging Comprehensive Strategy and Plan. It's really supplementing the focus on the future strategic plan for the whole university. And so this plan goes through 2023, but it's looking specifically at how we will address different diversity and belonging efforts on campus. So the plan really opens up with some of the campus demographics, but then it also goes into definitions because like we were just saying, language is something that's so powerful. And so we wanted to provide a linguistic framework for people to have an understanding of what certain words mean when we talk about diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. And one of the important things that we always say is that diversity, equity, inclusion are all things that lead to belonging. And so we really wanted people to kind of understand that works hand in hand. We also work through 4 strategies, and they were our goals that we have for the year. And so those are outlined in our plan, but they really focus heavily on what students will take away when they leave the university, that they will be culturally competent, that they won't have barriers to their success, that we're going to work to break those things down, that we're going to work on our hiring practices and some procedural things on the campus community to make sure that we're addressing some of those concerns, and that everybody will belong. And we put out a belonging survey, and last year's results were favorable, but still showed us that we had some work to do to make sure that people all have this sense of belonging. The other thing about the plan is that we developed metrics that weren't advertised or publicized, but we are looking consistently at, how are we doing when we say that we're going to do this work? and we're looking at it on a monthly basis to see the progress that we're making, because we know that 2023 will come fairly soon.
Sure. Yeah.
And so we are looking at, are there changes that we might need to make to this comprehensive strategy and plan in the meantime? If we say that this is our goal and we're going to do it through these thematic schemes of, education and awareness and programming and accountability and community and all of these different things, how are we doing that? And who are we working with in order to make sure that those things are happening? And so the metrics to me are actually almost more important than the plan, just because it's the way that we're measuring the action. And so that's the biggest thing with this plan, is that we don't want people to think that when we talk about diversity and belonging, that it's all talk.
Right.
I think that there has been a long history of people saying that they're committed to diversity and inclusion initiatives, and this is everywhere, not just at Bowling Green. I think that diversity and inclusion is something that has become somewhat of a buzzword or buzz phrase. And so with this plan, we wanted to focus on the action to show people that there is a major commitment at this university. President Rogers, Provost Whitehead, the entire cabinet, and then each and every department has an interest, an invested interest in making sure that we are doing this work. And so the plan really ends with a template that we use for our dean's action plan, and 100% of our deans submitted a plan on how to work through some various diversity and inclusion initiatives within their own colleges and units. And we're just thrilled with the progress so far, and really hoping to bring more people into the discussion. Love to see that students are getting involved in doing some different programs and proclamations and things of that nature, and pulling the city into the conversation as well has been something that has been important to us.
Right. Well, and you make a good point, too, that this isn't just a university initiative at the upper level. This starts at the department level, at the office levels, all of those things, and sort of builds toward the top versus from the top down. And that's a good point. And one other thing, too, when we talk about diversity, and we've touched on a couple of things, but diversity doesn't just mean racial diversity. It means a lot of other things, too. So, and your division deals with that whole array of things. So talk a little bit about some of the other diversity parts of this, that aside from the racial part or the ethnic part, because it's more than just that.
It is. Diversity, I mean, it exists everywhere. And I think that people forget about that. That diversity is really, all around us all the time. It's all of the things that make us different. It happens automatically. It is really, about the various things that make us who we are, any aspect of our identity. And so that goes beyond just race and ethnicity. It includes gender identity. It includes ability. It includes religion. It includes socioeconomic status. It includes so many things that just by nature of existing, diversity is always there. The harder work, because you don't really have to do anything to make sure that, there's diversity in some way. You could have a room where even all people look alike and there's still diversity within that room, right?
Okay.
But the harder work is to be intentional about representation, to make sure that areas are reflective of the diversity that exists within the whole world, right? So that we don't have spaces that look too much alike, but also where there aren't people who are all having the same types of thoughts and things like that as well. There is something to be said about diversity of perspective. It does help to improve diversity of identity as well. But then the harder work is the inclusion and the equity work, and making sure that we have inclusive policies and practices that make a community one where people want to be, they want to live, they want to learn. The equity is something that we're always striving for, so that people also are not constantly having to fight for basic rights, but that we are providing an equitable space for people to be able to succeed. When we aren't looking at inclusion and equity, it is really, really difficult to ever achieve belonging. People will not feel like there is a space set up for them where they belong if they can't first see that there are practices in place to make sure that there are no barriers to their success, where they cannot see that there is an appreciation and a celebration for the diversity that they bring, where they do not think that there's going to be equitable practices to give them a chance to advance and a chance to just really even do things well, right? Because if they're constantly fighting for basic rights and basic needs, then it's going to be very difficult, right?
Right.
So diversity is the starting point, and it's something that's already laid out for us, but we have to do the work to make sure that we are addressing representation, inclusion, equity, and that we are focused on different things like social justice and cultural competence and allyship in order to make sure that all of those things create this space where people belong.
Okay, great. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to talk about all of these issues and all of the initiatives, because obviously, as you said, we've made a lot of progress, but there's still a lot of work to do, and we're going to try and actually, do better at this and measure how we're progressing. And
Yes.
as you said, we've made progress, but like anything that requires effort, this one's has some long-term aspects to it, but
Absolutely.
we're working toward that ultimate
Yes.
ultimate correct goal. So that's good to know. Jennifer McCary, Chief Diversity Belonging Officer at BGSU, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you.
You're
Thank
welcome.
you for having me.
Yep, sure. And keep in mind, you can check us out at WBGU.org. And of course, you can watch the Journal every week right here on WBGU PBS. We will see you again next time on the Journal.